Stars. And today is Tuesday, May 31st. And the topic of today's show is going to be the new moon in Gemini, which is going to be occurring this week on Saturday at 11:33 p.m. And before I start today's show, I do want to recognize a very special member of our community who passed away this past weekend. His name was Dan Sayre from the Pathways, and was a dear friend and acquaintance. Him and his wife Pam, for many years that we knew them, and so I did want to take some time to honor and respect and recognize him today, and to show some support for his family, for Pam and her family. So we wanted to just send that word of support out to you. And going back to today's show, which is all about the new moon in Gemini, which is truly a turning point since all the changes that we experienced back in the spring in March. I always talk about, eclipses as being major turning points in anybody's lives, wherever they fall in somebody's birth chart, wherever they occur, is where there's a huge change that occurs. Endings and new beginnings happen, and March to April, April to May, May to June. June is the third month past that eclipse, and so it's a time where we are really becoming aware of the hurdles that we have been overcoming, and about the profound change of direction that is taking place in our lives. And so I'm going to be talking in depth about that on today's show. And I do want to talk a little bit at the beginning of the show about some news at Turn to the Stars. This past weekend we had a very nice fundraiser that we were helping Live and Let Live Farm with at the yard. And they had an incredible packed 200 people into the yard restaurant, and they had a great fundraiser with a lot of abundance. So we were so happy to see that for the animals and the care at Live and Let Live Farm. So thank you to all those people that came, and I wanted to just put that out there, and also wanted to talk a little bit about June 4th, which is this Saturday, the new moon, that I will be doing astrology readings at the Happy Hippie from 11 to 4. In the news on June 11th from 11 to 3, I'm joining up with Debbie Raymond Panette. She actually goes by Debbie Raymond now, and we're doing past life readings in partnership with mediumship. So it's astrology in combining the charts and what's in a person's DNA from their past lives with mediumship and the spiritual side of who we are. It is a life-changing reading. And then on June the 25th, it is our 32nd Psychic and Holistic Fair at Turn to the Stars, and it is called Transformation of Humanity, and that is really the topic of the fair, which everyone there is going to be working or together on supporting our community through these times of change. And for more information on any of what I've just talked about, you can go to turntothestars.com. There's a lot more information there. And so the new moon that I am going to be really focused on today's show, which is coming in this Saturday. We can already feel the influence of that coming. I have a chart which I'm going to put on the screen, which is the new moon chart. And if we could put that up, there we go. That new moon is highlighted by that pink circle down on the right corner. And I think that probably it's very highlighted because there is a lot of energy in that area of the chart, the new moon, the sun, the moon, and Venus all together, and the constellation of Gemini at 14 degrees and 55 minutes. And certainly what catches the eye about this astrology chart is the mutable cross that you see, which is the cross right through the middle of the chart. These are the angles, or the way the planets are speaking to each other. And so we're going to talk more about that. I'm going to call for that chart again soon. But this new moon really does illustrate the power of listening and sharing. And it is, as I said before, at exactly 14 degrees and 55 minutes. And many astrologers are saying that this reminds them of a famous quote, the energy of this new moon, of a famous quote by Henry David Thoreau. And he said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." And that's interesting because this phrase is really a great description of this energy, because this new moon does help us to remember how powerful our thoughts are. And remember, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And what the communication is, what the words are, what the understanding is. And so this new moon does help us to remember to think positively. Very, very important. There's always two sides to everything, and with all this stressful energy, as you saw in that chart, those red lines, the cross, that's stressful energy. It's really power-packed, stressful energy. It's a stressful chart. And this new moon is actually unveiling how important it is that we fuel positivity. Everything starts out with our thinking. So if we stay positive in our thinking, we're more apt to attract positive things in our lives. So this new moon energy coming in this week can leave you feeling overwhelmed by events and feeling pulled in so many directions. It's super important to find a point of stillness, a place to relax and to be quiet, where there's no movement. Just sit and relax. One of the things that I do when I do my show is I include something that I learned a while ago from 18 Man, and it is called A New Vision of Astrology. And it actually gives us a chart which gives us time periods that are parallel with this exact time. And so the parallel time to this new moon is actually 9857 BC. And this time period was actually Mesolithic, a period of Mesolithic tribal cults. Prehistoric humans were alive at this time. And these people were most noted for their primitive stone tools. And there was a lot of development of different languages that was occurring. There were new villages that were forming. It was a time where Tanis cults, and I looked up Tanis cults and what that meant. And a Tanis cult is a cult descended from Ireland and came together literally because they were considered kingly material. People that were considered kingly material, mainly from the paternal side. It was a time of a lot of movement, a lot of division. It was an age of globalization, a time of later Mesolithic culture. It was a transitional time between hunters and gatherers and agricultural practices. And so you might be saying to yourself, how does this parallel with our current time? And the way that it does parallel is that we are in a period of influx. We are unsure of so much. Whenever I see a mutable cross, such as what I'm seeing in the chart, the new moon chart for this Saturday, I know it's most important to discuss all the positives that surround that mutable liquid type of energy. It seems so unstable, so insecure, and typically mutable energy is of that sort. So one of the things, I would like to put that chart back on the screen again. You can see what looks like a pyramid in the middle of the chart, which is formed by the blue lines that are from Pluto over to the left to the North Node in Virgo, next to Jupiter in Virgo, and down to Mercury in Taurus. And so that is actually a sustaining type of energy, one that gives us relief from the instability that the Grand Cross that's formed by Saturn opposite Venus, Moon, Sun, and Gemini, squaring the North Node in Jupiter, and squaring Neptune in the South Node. So that grand trine in Earth does give us a sense of stability, a sense of groundedness. And so I know how important to discuss the positivity that this grand trine in Earth brings. It's really important for so many people to be able to access the territory of positivity. And this is one of the indicators in this chart that does show that. And you can take that chart off the screen. We're all set with that for right now. But as things will not be so transparent with Jupiter in Virgo opposite Neptune in Pisces, that is typical of that aspect. When you see an opposition to Neptune, things are typically not so transparent. Our best option really is to study what directions will lead us to healthier ground, where there's clarity, where things aren't cloudy or foggy or out of focus. With Jupiter trining Pluto in Capricorn, this energy tends to lend hand to unveiling power, and it's power that can change the current structures. That's what Pluto in Capricorn is unveiling to us, especially in the areas of government. The other day I saw a newscast, and they were talking about an experiment that was taking place in Kenya, and they were using mobile money, something called M-Pesa, and talk about powerful waves of massive control of material structure. This is what is happening in Kenya. And I thought that would be, that's one of the structures that we're seeing changing in the world, is the way that money is utilized and monopolized, and the ways that it's changing. And one of the things that we see in the chart for this new moon is Saturn in Sagittarius opposite the moon, the sun, and Venus in Gemini. And what that tells us is, by its placement, is that there is, family histories are looked at. A lot of people are going to be looking at, maybe gathering some information about their family and their roots and their culture. And any information that has been held back is capable of being revealed during this time. Value systems, belief systems are going to be widely discussed. It's interesting that in that chart we see Chiron, and we see Chiron in Pisces, and we see this connection, which is called a semi-sextile, which connects Chiron to Uranus to Mercury, to the moon, to the sun, to Venus. It's interesting when you have, imagine like you have 5 people and they're all holding on to a rope that ties them all together. And that is sort of what these planets are doing. And what it means is that it's offering us some relief and possibilities for places where we can find some sense of healing old wounds by changing our awareness of ourselves, and add in practical, logical, realistic communications, talking things out, and to connect it with the availability of new beginnings. It's so interesting that that new moon connects with all those planets, sort of like a rope connecting everything together, bringing us together and giving us some level of relief where there can be the possibility of new beginnings. And it's also surrounded by an acknowledgement of valuable and positive sharing of life-sustaining knowledge, and that you have a band of planets supporting that positivity in the world. So that's good news. Especially during this time when it feels as if the world around us is in utter chaos, and there's so much instability, and things are just changing so fast that the human being has a very hard time to manage this energy. You may see through this new moon that there's lots of mix-ups in communication, and this should be expected. Realizations about where our belief systems come from are very much present. So much truth about who we are and where we come from has the ability to materialize during this month. I actually did a little research into the last time Jupiter was in Virgo, which was back in 2003. Jupiter takes about 12 years to move through one constellation. And back in 2003 was the last time Jupiter was in Virgo. And what was interesting that was happening at that time was the GMO topic became front and center. Genetically mutated organisms, which is something that was being utilized in our seeds and plants. And so it was changing the actual ability for a plant to reproduce, or a seed to be reproduced beyond what it was already. So now it's critical at this time, as Jupiter comes back into Virgo again, it's critical we go in a more healthy direction. This is really highlighted, especially with that North Node, meaning new territory in Virgo right next to it. So this month is going to be an eye-opener for Geminis, Virgos, Sagittarius, and Pisces due to the grand mutable cross that you saw in that chart. Workplaces will be heavily under scrutiny. The possibility of medical breakthroughs, resourcefulness will become a must. Virgo is one that can be very resourceful. It is an earth energy. It is one that has the ability to really analyze every possibility of whatever is at hand. Also, in 2003, scientists proved that a low-calorie diet would prolong life if it was held to. They also proved that if it was not adhered to, that it would not continue that prolonging of life. Also, in 2003, math scores reached a 36-year high in 2003, and it was probably because of the concentration on detail and the step-by-step methods that were adhered to at that time. At that time, some well-known quotes by H.G. Wells, who had the Sun and Mercury in Virgo, were made known. And he said, and this is interesting because Virgo also has the capability of being somewhat of a kind of a dry, has a kind of a dry tone to it. So he said that some people bear three kinds of trouble: the ones they've had, the ones they have, and the ones they expect to have. So it's kind of, Virgo can be a bit insecure in the process of their own self, let's say, realization. So it can also be one of those signs that, has to really concentrate or be more present that, about the health of what they're saying, about what they're thinking. And there was another quote I found also in preparing for today's show. Lily Tomlin, she also had the Sun and Venus in Virgo, and she said that man invented language to satisfy his deep need to complain. So, obviously, it's very important for us to be cognizant while we have this mutable energy of being very positive and thinking positive and staying away from those things that tend to drag us down. My point in talking about Jupiter in Virgo is that it is the biggest planet in our solar system, and it does point us into areas or territories that are more healthy and away from ones that are unhealthy. But it takes time with this grand mutable cross for that to become apparent to us. So our thinking and through talking to others and through the experiences that we're having, we realize that some areas that we are presently involved in or inspired by might be unhealthy. So, talking about health, as I near the end of the show, I want to leave you with a famous quote by Hippocrates, a Greek physician, a well-known Greek physician. He said, "A physician without a knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself or herself a physician." It was required, and there are still some countries that it is required to have the education of astrology in order to be a doctor or a physician. So Hippocrates was considered one of the most outstanding figures in the history of our time, of his time and of medicine. So again, I wanted to just really sort of to wrap this all up, just to remind you that we are at a very critical month. As we move past this month, through this month, there's going to be a lot of realizations, changes, profound changes of directions through the realization, and that we should stay grounded, that we have the capability to stay grounded as we move through these times of change. And so, again, I want to say thank you to everyone for your support of Turn to the Stars. Thank you to Channel 23, Manchester Public Television Station, and I want to remind you all to turn to the stars, and you'll find your answers there. Take good care, and I'll see you next week.